Welcome to the PR Wind Down Podcast, the show for public relations professionals who are ready to see real change in the PR industry. We are your hosts, April Margulies and Laura Schooler. Let's get ready to wind down.
So our what not to do is what not to do when the agency or company you work for gets acquired. I have a good one for this. So it is extremely difficult as an in-house communications person if you're going through a merger and people are getting laid off to not tell all of your friends at the company
that you know what's going on, but they don't know. Well, so a lot of times when your client's getting bought or there's a merger, whatever, it's a very secretive event. And your client oftentimes isn't allowed to even tell you, the agency, and it's probably super hard for them. And then when it comes out that they were bought or they merged, the PR firm is like scrambling because, oh my, what? Or like you said, if you are the agency and you do know, and you can't tell your contact or the people you know because you've been sworn to secrecy by the CEO or whomever, it's almost like when you know that you're quitting a job, or when somebody knows that you're going to get fired and you have to pretend, and it's the most awkward thing.
It's the worst.
And then when it happens, it's even worse sometimes, because there's always a scramble of some kind. You know, maybe the firm stays on, maybe the firm doesn't stay on, you know, there's a lot of different ways it could go. Or you might find out that you got the heave ho because they're using the other company's PR firm or whatever. So what do you do or not do in that case?
Well, what you don't do is put your allegiance to your friends at the company first, as much as you want to. And it sucks.
Yeah, it's business.
It can compromise your job. So yeah, you think you're being a good friend, which you are, because you're being loyal to them, but disloyal to the company.
Right,
Problem
and
is,
you're there because it's business.
If it's an M&A thing and a bunch of people are getting laid off, maybe you were going to be kept, but your disloyalty got back to someone and now you're going to be laid off too, right? Like you could be risking.
Oh, right.
So
that could be the end of you. A lot of it is, especially if one of the companies is publicly traded, you're really literally not allowed to tell anybody because they get in trouble with the SEC or the whatever for sharing insider information. So there's some serious business reasons why not just because like, oh, we don't want to tell Bob, you know?
Right. I have not yet lived through a situation where an agency merged with another agency or was acquired. Have you seen that or lived through that?
I worked for an agency that had just recently gotten acquired or merged with another one, but I didn't have anything to do with it. When I was at PwC, we would buy, you know, small consulting companies all the time. I was usually not the main point of contact though, because I was in the industry group. Usually it was the line of service, not the industry, that knew first and foremost. But it was always difficult, you know, when a company buys another company and the culture is just totally like not a fit. And also the people who were used to being like the senior top dogs at some small privately owned firm, all of a sudden now were shoved in the world's biggest accounting consulting firm, and they had to scramble and make themselves known, and they wanted to get coverage. And in some cases we did use those people first and foremost, because the reason why PwC bought these companies is because they didn't have that specialty. So now suddenly we had these experts in this area. So we would gladly use those spokespeople. But I do think that the integration otherwise was very challenging most of the time.
Yeah, for sure. No, I think it would be really difficult if you were the smaller company getting acquired. And then all of a sudden you have all your systems and culture and values. And I mean, it's really difficult when people that you're friends with end up getting laid off during one of these transitions, for you to stay with a good attitude and not be so afraid that you're going to lose your job or so angry that your friend's dead that you can't function, you know?
Yeah.
It's a tricky situation for sure. And in some cases, kids, they want you to quit so they don't have to lay people off and give them severance packages.
And if they offer you a severance package, don't try to hang on, take it, because they will just get rid of you in 6 months or a year, and the severance package will not be as good as the first one that you got. Mark my words.
So this is sort of PR related, but sort of just wise words in general, right?
Right.
I think from a PR perspective, though, what we said about not letting people know, I mean, you cannot tell anyone that could leak to the press either, especially if it's a publicly traded company or something like that. You really have to bite your tongue.
Right. And if you hadn't been part of that sale, merger, whatever, or if you weren't, but shortly thereafter, senior people come to you to make sure that you're good, you're probably not going to be happy, or they're probably going to get rid of you.
Really? You mean if they come to check on you and your happiness?
If they don't.
Oh, if they don't come to check on your happiness. Oh, that's good advice.
Because if you're somebody who they're looking to keep in the middle of that, you'll either be part of that from the get-go and know the inside information, or as soon as it happens, they will come to you very quickly to make sure that you're on board. This is what we're going to do, and this is where you're going to be. If you don't get approached to see how you're doing or to be told where you're placed, you're probably going to not be there. Maybe if you're very junior, because you're so junior, it doesn't really matter. But if you're like mid to senior level and you are out on that, you're probably not there for long. However, if we go back to what we just said, maybe you want to stick around and see if you get a severance package.
Actually, that's good advice, because if you're a card player, then you don't want to go out and look for a new job if you're maybe going to get a severance package that's going to cover you for 3 or 4 months, because you could definitely get a job in 3 or 4 months.
Well, right now in this market, yeah, especially if you're very senior. And usually you can find out what that package is going to be or is supposed to be by reading, if you have an employment contract or there's like a employee handbook, and at the big companies, they have this stuff, big publicly traded companies, maybe big partnership, where they list out what you are entitled to if they let you go. So make sure that you look at that or find out about it, because a lot of times either they try to sneak it by you, because most people don't even think about that stuff, or they don't know either. You don't even have to fight. You just have to show them, this is what your own handbook says. I'm entitled to, for every year I worked here, I get 2 weeks severance or whatever it might list out. And I'm entitled to my bonus, and I'm entitled to healthcare, all of those things. You have to look that up. And usually they will give it to you because they don't want you to get a lawyer. But you might think about also getting a lawyer. PR agencies are also having trouble finding people.
That's true.
But I think it's because there's a lot of jobs and you can command a lot more money when you probably shouldn't be getting that much money. It's like the .com era. I've talked to some recruiters about it. Like people with 12 years experience. What level would you hire somebody with 12 years of experience?
Like what salary?
Or what title?
Maybe account director, maybe senior account supervisor, possibly VP.
Right. So how much money, what would the range be for such a person?
I'd probably put it in the, 85 to 100, 110 a year.
What I'm about to tell you, your head's going to like fall off your neck, because I have a recruiter telling me that people with that level of experience are asking for over $200,000 a year.
What?
So that's what we're dealing with. And it's because there's all this business flying around. It's like the .com days again. And she says it's going to crash as it did before. And then all these people who are getting paid ridiculous amounts of money are going to lose their jobs.
Yep.
Because companies won't sustain that salary.
Well, no. And the big problem with that too, if you get over promoted or you get either in title or money, is that then you can become unhireable. Because suddenly you can out salary yourself. And then if you tell people what you're making, they're going to take somebody cheaper. So you end up making yourself almost obsolete by having a salary that's so high, which happens a lot in PR. People getting promoted twice and triple and whatever, just to keep people in an abusive environment, which happens all the time. And then what happens is you're totally incapable of doing the job that you're expected to do. So suddenly, if you take another job at another agency with that title, what you're going to be able to perform at that level is not going to match the level you can actually perform at.
Right.
So what are you going to do? Right.
you're right about you
then you
become
suddenly,
unhireable.
yeah.
So what you do maybe, and I understand somebody offers you or you can get like a ridiculous sum of money, you go for it, you take it, you play it out as long as you can, but you better be ready for it to come to an end. And then you're going to probably have to look for a job at a lower salary and title. And you know what? Unless you're really the second coming of PR, don't let your ego get in the way of that.
Yeah.
Don't be like, I was a double senior vice president making
senior.
$500,000. Like, I deserve that. I was so genius. Like,
Right.
were you really? You're going to have to come back down to earth eventually. So what do? Think about how much you were making at the job before and add 10 or 20% to that. And do not think that you have another job unless you have it in writing and a contract that you have signed. These things, like I just said with recruiters, oh my God, it's right there. It's my job. And then they go away suddenly.
Mm-hmm. Right. Also, if you are open to staying at the agency that you're at, give them a chance to give you a counteroffer. Don't necessarily come out of the gate swinging saying, here's my last day. Say, hey, got an offer.
Well, right. That's what I mean.
It's too good to be true, right? Because it's like, did they want a counteroffer? They didn't give me any space for it. Do I make a counter? You know what I mean? What do I do here?
And think about it. If you actually like your job or where you work or the people you're with, the devil you know is worth a lot than the devil you don't know. Unless you're getting wildly more money, and even then, I don't know if I would necessarily recommend it, but for junior people, sure, climb the ladder, get as much money as you can, fine. I get it. You know, if you're going to jump from 50 grand to 85, I understand you want to do that. But if you're going to jump from 50 grand to 57 grand, if you really like your job, I wouldn't recommend leaving it. Because that, as we've said throughout this whole episode, is worth way more than a few $1,000s.
People. It's all about people. I agree with that.
Well, this turned into a better segment than I thought.
Okay. Our guest today is Jenn McManus-Goode. She is our Senior Vice President here at Trust Relations and brings to the table more than 2 decades of communications experience. Jenn is here to discuss some best practices for a successful upsell and also to share her best tips for navigating major client transitions.
Thank you for having me.
We're
Jenn.
super excited. Yeah, so I know that you've recently, and not just recently, but probably for a long time now, have had a lot of experience both with the upsell and the transition. And I'd love to hear your words of wisdom for people that maybe haven't been through it yet and how to best navigate those slightly challenging waters.
Yeah, I think on the upsell side, it should be just listen for the right things. Nobody wants to be sold to, right? Like nobody wants to think that you're always looking for more ways to take their money. So I am not a, always be closing kind of person. That's not really my deal. But every once in a while, I think a lot of people hire PR agencies for one specific thing, or they have an impression of what PR agencies do. And now I feel like there's a lot of different skill sets within the agency. So when you're hearing a client say like, oh yeah, we're really happy with this month's deliverables, but the reason why we couldn't do X is because, we're really having problems with converting leads, or, we're really having problems with our website. Those are the kind of things you should be listening for and just say like, oh, those are things that we're capable of doing and we'd be happy to help you with because we already know your business. One thing that I learned internally is that onboarding people both within your company and agencies or consultants, it's a pain in the ass. It's a lot of time and money that you have to invest in it. So if you have a good relationship with people, you'll tend to trust them with more work. So I think that that's sort of the key thing. It's like establish that trust and use that as a selling point. I know your business. I personally can't help your website be more SEO friendly, but I know someone here that can, or we contract with another agency that works on that. it's more about networking and connecting people to the right other people than like, oh, you're looking for a new website? Let me sell you our website package. We've been on the receiving end of that and nobody wants it. So
I think that if you have successfully positioned yourself as a strategic counselor to your client through your PR engagements, then they're going to come to you and ask for your advice. And that gives you an opportunity to say, well, we don't do X, but we'll refer you to these, but we do Y. So let's talk about how we can help you do that, right?
Yeah, it's always listening. And then also just understanding that you have to adapt. Like your contract may say, this is a media relations engagement. And then, that's great. You do great media relations work. But as you start understanding their business, it's like, okay, what are you really trying to accomplish here? What is the purpose of this content? And it might be that you just change your engagement a little bit to kind of meet the client where they are. I've done that multiple times, especially like after a successful raise or things like that. PR is not.
Where do you go from there?
Yeah, you might want to up your budget with content writing or byline development as opposed to pure media relations.
That's interesting because especially with startup companies that, I've worked at PwC and there's 50 different silos and things going on. But at a startup, they're pretty single-minded when they're first going and they're doing one or two things. So once you get like all the PR that you can for, like you said, the raise, okay, now what do you do? Sit around and wait for them to get a partner or a client that you can announce? So while you're sort of just in the background running PR, right, what else can you do for them? Is it social media? Is it something else? Because I've seen it happen where you do a great job for 3 months and then they're sort of run out of steam. Mm-hmm. And maybe there's going to be another big PR need, but that might not happen for another 8 months or, whatever. So what do you do in the interim?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This was very early on in my career and it was super depressing, but it's stayed with me. So it's like, oh, lessons learned during kind of crappy times. But I also worked at big companies and the CEO came into a room of all the marketing people and PR people and like internal comms and just looked and said, that's a lot of overhead. I've never forgot that because if you're not constantly showing, and that's not like your fancy charts and your metrics, I spent 60 hours making you this fancy PowerPoint that I could have been spending doing work. It's more about how are you showing that you're valuable, because chances are your client contact, unless you're at a startup, someone else is making the financial decisions and looking at that budget and saying, oh, PR, what are we spending this on? Being able to quantify what value you provide, but also qualitatively say, these are the recommendations that we've made. Here's the conversations that we've had. Here's what we've been able to do, kind of keeping track of that stuff as well.
Jen, have you ever seen somebody who was trying to upsell a client just fail, something go totally sideways?
Yeah.
And can you elaborate?
I have one client in my last life that had been a client for a very long time, probably more than a decade. So we knew their business very, very well. And when we had a new leadership team at the agency sort of come down with these rules and regulations, we always have to be upselling, or if a contract hasn't been renegotiated in 2 years, it's time to do it. And in this particular case, the team, myself included, said the company is going through some changes now. And the person that was sort of making these asks said, well, I'm looking at all the financials and it looks like they're doing very well and their stock price is this, and they're making billions of dollars, they can afford more on PR. And when we went to sort of do this, hey, we want to have a conversation about doing more work for you, the client contact, who had been a client contact for a decade, was like, everything that's going on right now. We're changing our marketing model, that we're in between CMOs. Like, why would you ask for this now? It just left a bad taste in the client's mouth. The team felt kind of disempowered because we had the relationship and we knew it was not the right thing to do. So agencies, like any other business, are businesses. We have to make money. Like, I get that. But I think a one size fits all approach to upselling and expanding contracts is just never going to be a good thing.
That's really good advice. So the other thing I wanted to talk to Jenn about is account transitions. And these can happen either because somebody quits, which happens. This can happen because a client's angry and you have to swap out team members as sort of a strategy for appeasing them. This can happen just because somebody's not a right fit. They don't like the client. They don't want to work on it anymore. I mean, there can be all kinds of reasons, right? Or it can happen if there's a shift on the client side, to your point, John, before, where suddenly the client contact is different and they have different expectations, and the team that matched the previous client contact no longer matches the new client contact and their style and expectations, et cetera, et cetera. So what are some of the best practices when navigating these waters? And again, what are some of the what not to do's so you don't take the thing off the cliff?
From a leadership perspective, anytime I'm talking to a client about people leaving, I think it's important to be honest. Every agency and every person in consulting or professional services would love to think that like people go to their company because of their brand or, whatever. That is true, but people like their people. So I think dismissing that concern when a client is upset that their person is leaving, just don't do it. I've been that client where my people left and I'm like, all right, I'm on my third person. I just need you to find someone that is going to be my person to trust, because I have relationships with these people and I trust their judgment and I trust that. So there's that. And I think from a leadership perspective, like making yourself available so that the client doesn't know when you swoop in that it means that something bad happened. So it's like April's having a conversation with client X. Hopefully client X has seen or heard from April before. So it's not just like, oh, hey, so-and-so left, but I have a great replacement and this is why you're going to love that other person. Like on the client side, you feel almost discounted that the people are replaceable because they're not. That said, PR is it's
high
a wheel
churn business. Yeah.
It's a high churn business. It's just important to have those relationships and be honest when you know that someone's leaving or like it's just not a right fit. I think it's fine, totally okay to say to the client, this person is more suited for an account that does X, Y, and Z. We have someone that is really great with what you do, and we want you to meet him or her and have a conversation and let me know how it goes. I'm from New Jersey, so I don't really have a filter. So whenever I'm like brought into these conversations, I usually say, hey, I've been brought in because something hit the fan and I understand that you're upset. So let's talk about that. I find that it disarms people a lot. And then they you let them vent for 5 minutes and then you go, okay, so what should we do to fix this? Like, what are your top 3 priorities for me?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the honesty is really important. I don't think throwing people under the bus just, for the sake of it for the client is smart. And I think if you're going to say they're not a good fit, to John's point, you need to say why they're great at something else. So you aren't just saying they're a terrible person, they're a bad practitioner. Like you can't do that.
Never hire them again.
That also sort of undercuts and undermines your kindness and sort of judgment as a business owner or a senior leader. So I think it's important to say, hey, this person is dealing with a personal issue right now and can't put the focus on this they need to, or they're better suited for an account that does XYZ, or their style is not necessarily a match for you, given that what you need right now is A through C, right? I think it's just important to just be really direct and honest with them in a way that you would be with a friend. Maybe it's a mismatch of personalities. We just need to wipe the slate clean, get you somebody that's a better fit. And,
especially for young people that are just starting out in PR, it's not personal a lot of times. You're going to learn more about what kinds of accounts you work well on and what ones you don't. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I've been on accounts where on paper, I should love this account because it's, super cool consumer or like women owned and, like everything that checks all my personal life buttons. And then it's just a disaster because it's not a personality match. Or in other times I have worked on seriously like the most god awful, boring
Snorefest.
Yeah, just boring technologies, but because I had free reign and client trust to do what I wanted, they were like the best accounts because
always say that. I say it doesn't really matter what the company is, it's the people who you work with that matter the most.
I think that it's just important to remember that it's not personal, that sometimes it's just not going to be the right fit and you just have to do what's right for the business. And I also think it's important for you as an employee to speak up. You have a voice and you can do favors every once in a while, but if it's not good for you, it's not going to be good for the team. It's not going to be good for the client. It's not going to be good for the agency. So I think it's important too to recognize when you know what is going to be a good fit or not.
I think one of the most challenging transitions in my experience is swapping out the most senior person or the day-to-day lead. The junior people can be hard to swap out too, especially if they've been doing all the day-to-day. But I find that usually that doesn't bother the client as much or the team, right? Because the challenge of doing it at a mid to senior level is that if the consistent person then is the junior person, that's a lot of pressure and responsibility for that junior team member, regardless of how incredible they are, right? It's like a big lift. But
carrying China on your back. Not the country, plates and cups.
Because it's delicate and it's heavy, but Jenna is a pro at that. So do you have any tips for how to navigate that piece and also how to even manage the junior person who might have gotten stuck in the consistent piece of the account that's still in place while other things have moved around them?
Again, I think it's a matter of having that conversation and also being willing to help them in the way that they need. And sometimes that is, oh, you have 20 pitches you have to get out in the next hour, or you have to do a media list. Let us help you with that. Is it always cost effective to have your senior people doing work like that? No, but I absolutely think it's absurd. And like part of the reason why I really do like the agencies that I'm contracting with right now is that there's this idea that you're not going to ask people to do work that you wouldn't do yourself. And especially if someone has been a cat hanging on by the claws, it's like, all right, we're coming on, we're going to stabilize this account. The day-to-day, what can we do? And don't be shy. Don't think that I shouldn't be doing something because like I have a fancy title. Like anything that's going to help that person feel like, oh, it's not just another person telling me what to do. It's someone that's got my back and wants to keep this account.
I think that's good advice.
And maybe I've mentioned this before. I've worked at a company once that double and triple promoted, obviously junior people, to suddenly be the strategic lead to some of the most senior people on planet Earth. And it sort of goes back to what you said, the whole, like, I see a lot of overhead here. Of course, they didn't pay them what a senior VP would be making because they were just an account executive the day before and they were 25 years old. For a mid-20-year-old person to suddenly be advising a 58-year-old white guy who's been doing whatever he's been doing for 40 years doesn't often work out that well, believe it or not. Now that I'm an old person, the whole experience factor is so underrated, and it's because people are cheap and they're hoping they can just get by with it. But I have said to junior people recently in the past couple of years, was like, oh my God, how did you know that? And I'm like, because I'm a genius. No, because I've seen this movie 4 times before. I've been doing PR for decades. And my ability to say, that's not going to work, or this is how you have to handle that, or no, or whatever, in 2 seconds, instead of somebody who's never done it before, going through hell and high water for 3 weeks to come to the same answer that I could have given them on the spot. That's a waste of money and time. And senior people, I mean, what, you're going to listen to somebody? So I've seen those kinds of transitions failed.
That's a good point. That made me think about training, like so much, and not just in PR, in every industry, people get really good at a skill and then they get promoted to management. Right. And they haven't been taught how to manage.
Just because you're older doesn't mean you're a good manager.
Yeah, or just because you were a great AE doesn't mean you're going to be a super great SAE. And that came up a lot in my past life and different agencies that I worked for in the past. And people always say they want training and development. And I think as senior people, we have a responsibility to kind of figure out, like, well, what does that look like? I think a lot of times people decide, oh, they want training and development, so we're going to roll out a formal training program and everybody's going to do this and you're going to get credit and that. And it's like, what do you want to learn? Because sometimes it is just experience and sometimes it is they just kind of want to pick your brain for ideas. I have an example today where someone was asking for an example of how to write a certain kind of announcement. And I was like, I'm going to be honest about this situation. I'm like, well, when I made my strategic counsel to the client to look for examples of this type of announcement, I relied heavily on my master's degree. No, not at all. I Googled it and then just kind of looked at it and was like, all right, here's how I do it. But I think it's fine to tell people some of our knowledge is from experience and some of it is from doing like the same things that you do.
Research.
Wikipedia. It's like, I am not an expert, but Wikipedia and the Google helps every once in a while.
Right. Don't ever feel insecure, I think, in what you don't know, because you can always ask the internet or somebody above you.
And I think it's fine for people to say, I don't know the answer to that, or it's totally fine to not be projecting 100% confidence like all the time.
Right.
It's all about having something in common with people, and people tend to very much bond over, wow, you're as insecure as I am. It's like, yeah, let's be insecure together and rule the world. Yeah.
Oh man. Well, Jen, I know you're a little bit tight on time since you have a family to send to. Do you have any closing thoughts for us or any closing advice?
Yeah, I mean, thank you for having me. I don't think I sweared, so that's a A+ for me. Ask a lot of questions. Ask what people need. What would be helpful to you right now? What are the top 3 things to your clients or even to the team member that you want me to prioritize? What's going to be useful to you? I think just asking the questions sometimes gets people to be like, oh, whoa, thank you. Thank you for asking.
Thanks for noticing me. Right.
Yeah, or thank you for asking before we all waste time and money doing something that's not needed.
That's good advice. Well, thank you. Anything else you want to plug?
Thanks to HelloFresh, I can join this podcast.
That's a good one. All right. Well, we appreciate it. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Cool.
I'll talk to you soon.
Sounds good.
Talk to you later.
Bye, Jen.
Bye.
Bye.
All right. Should we move on to the horror story of the day?
Yes.
The horror story of the moment? There was a restaurant that wasn't the soup of the day, it was the soup of the moment.
Oh, that's so zen. The power of now.
Soup of the moment. Whoever finds it fastest reads it. Got it.
I can't even find my email.
Okay. All right.
Go.
Do not open until podcast. Hi, April and Laura. This is a current horror story for me, and I hope you can help me navigate things before it gets worse. Oh my. I'm an AE, and I have been at the same agency for about 2 years, so most of my career. And recently, they did a pretty big round of layoffs for financial reasons. And I was one of the surviving account executives. I'm relieved to have kept my job, but things have been tough with staffing. I am working loads of overtime hours with no end in sight, and I feel a little bit out of my element in terms of my expertise. I'm fielding a lot of high-level client questions without much senior guidance. And I really don't think they'll be hiring anyone new anytime soon. Wait, I would hate to jump ship and look for a new job. I like my team, but I'm having a tough time with work boundaries, and I'm worried I don't have enough experience to meet my clients' expectations without very much management support. I normally consider myself to be proactive and a go-getter, but I feel kind of like a kid wearing their dad's suit because the work I'm doing right now is pretty far out of my experience level. What should I do? Question mark, question mark, question mark. Should I quit before I make a major mistake and get fired anyway, or try to stick it out? Question mark, question mark, question mark. Lots of question marks. 2 questions.
Well,
6
it sort of plays
marks.
into everything we've been talking about. So
It
that's
does.
interesting.
That is interesting. It's very on theme.
Because we really didn't read it before, everybody.
No, we didn't. Yeah, it is kind of bizarrely on theme for the episode.
Well, what do you think?
I think it's not this person's responsibility to be more senior than they are. And I wouldn't quit a job because somebody's putting you in a position that's
Above
over your head.
Mm-hmm.
That's the responsibility of the business owner, of the management team, of the senior leaders, right? If that's what they do when you mess something up, that's on them, right? So they can blame you for it, and they may, but you cannot take that personally regardless, because you have to know at the end of the day that they were just leaning on you too much and it was unfair. So first of all, I would not say quit because you're worried that you're going to make a mistake. That's not on you. That's on the people that put the team together or didn't put the team together in this case. I think you're not going to get fired. The likelihood, if you do a good job, that you're going to endear yourself to the agency and eventually get promoted is probably very high. So it is a kind of a high risk, high reward situation. If you are working so many hours that you're starting to burn out, then I think you might need to work on setting better boundaries and just say, hey, I'm so overwhelmed, I'm afraid I'm going to make mistakes. And maybe even come to the table with some ideas. What if I offloaded this account? Or could we get me help here so I can focus here? Could we get me an AC that can come underneath me and help me with some stuff? Because this is a lot to juggle.
There's no other senior mentorship or something that this person could tap into or request?
I mean, they say without very much management support. So it does look like kind of just being left in the deep end.
I really think that this person needs to go to whoever the more senior people are. If they're too afraid to go to the owner or the CEO of this, I don't know how big the firm is, but the people who are more senior than anybody they feel they have some kind of relationship, and ask them to help figure this out ahead of time.
Right.
I think they got to get ahead of it, because you cannot be expected to do work that you don't really, as we talked about before, know how to do. You need to have somebody directing the ship, or of course it's going to be a huge flop and you're going to feel terrible, even though it's not your fault. Or you'll be up all night doing work for 10 hours that could take somebody who knows what they're doing 30 minutes to do, right? If the only person that really is senior to you that you can go to is the owner or the CEO, go to them. You have to. Don't be afraid to go to them. You have to. You have to be like, look, tell them what you do know how to do and what you are excited to do, but that you really feel that you need some experienced mentorship or leadership or something to help you to make sure that this runs smoothly and nothing falls through the cracks. Right?
I think so.
I mean, you've been there. You've talked about it before, being given ridiculous responsibility, and like, how horrible was it? It was horrible.
I like being in the deep end. So for me, it was always thrilling, but
you've admitted that it was crazy, right?
It was crazy. And the problem with that is that if you're trying to teach yourself to do something above you and you don't have someone else, don't know that you don't really know how to do it.
Right. You don't even know.
You can convince yourself that you know how to do it. And then the same problem happens we just talked about, where you get over promoted or have an overinflated idea of what you can do.
Right.
Get put into a situation to match that level of what you think you can do. And then turns out you can't.
Right.
Not really.
You're not really learning.
Not really.
You're just making it up as you go along, even though you might be wrong.
So there's something to be said for both. Like, I think it's good to be a go-getter that throws
starter.
Yeah, and throw yourself into it.
There are things you just won't know. I mean, I wonder if even, let's say your company, they're like, nope. Good luck. Do it for yourself, kid. So we're trying to convince you not to quit, I guess is the point. You could go into a group on Facebook, LinkedIn, Slack, whatever, and say, hey, is somebody senior out there?
Go get a mentor.
You're right. versed in this industry or in this type of launch or whatever, and can you help me a little bit, give me some pointers and directors? I've just gotten sort of thrown in the deep end of the pool and nobody in my company will help, and I don't want to fail or quit.
That's good advice.
You might be able to find somebody totally outside to really help direct you, and then you will owe that person your life.
And so many of us have been in that situation, so we would be very empathetic if somebody hit us up. Hey, I'm really impressed with you. Can you be my mentor? Right? Like, I don't think Jenn McManus, who we had on, or Laura, or myself, or anybody that I know that at this senior level hasn't had an experience like that and wouldn't be like, yeah, 100%. What can I do to help? I have an hour on Tuesday, you know?
So April, did you just volunteer?
I guess I did.
You're a mental mentor.
I'm a big softie. That's what I am.
All right, so whoever wrote this,
don't quit.
And call April. Her
call
number
me.
is 8675-309.
That's not a full number, so it's a lie. You can email me.
666-8675-309.
That's not my number either. It's not my number. She's lying to you.
Do you know that? Do you know what number that is that I just gave?
No, it's probably from a song though.
You're so smart. Remember, do you know that song? 8675309.
Yes.
That's it.
That's so funny.
You go to one of my Facebook pages, that's the number I put there, and somebody was like, I kept calling you and it wasn't going through.
Oh my God. Okay, so we have one more thing on our agenda for the day, and that's our news of the day. I think, Laura, you nominated this, didn't you?
Probably, because I'm so versed.
It's a story about editorial workers at Forbes winning a union vote, 90.5%. Can you give a little background on this for the listeners who don't know about this?
So this story written by Sally Davidow. Davidow?
I don't know.
David O.W. David Ow. Sally Davidow wrote a story entitled Editorial Workers at Forbes Win Union Vote 90.5%. That's huge if you want to think about it in terms, and I don't know what their percentage was, but the Amazon workers, they were trying to unionize and they lost. So I assume less than 50% of the people. So 67 voted yes, only 7 voted no. So this will encompass about 100 newsroom employees, reporters, editors, designers, videographers, social media editors, and they will join News Guild of Local 31003. That's funny. You know, like Local 1 or 2 are like the guys who, they're hugely powerful in New York City. They are the guys who put all of the flooring and staging into Madison Square Garden.
Huh.
They're like Local 2, and so this is Local 31003. They are trying to make it, from their point of view, a more secure workplace for the staffers. They are looking to, as a unit, address diversity, pay equity, editorial integrity.
That's interesting.
A more stable and transparent workplace. The union went through, but now they have to come up with, I guess, a union contract. And see if Forbes management goes for it, right? What else do I want to say about it? The Forbes family has long been associated with Forbes, but now it's 95% owned by Integrated Whale Media Investments, a Chinese company based in Hong Kong. I did not know that.
Wow, I didn't either.
Only 5% is owned by the Forbes family.
What?
That seems like breaking news to me, but I guess it's probably not.
I mean, that's not going to help all these conspiracy theories about
media being liberal. Well,
media turning communist. It's like it's owned by China. Oh no. It's like,
that's funny. Well, Forbes is a very different publication than it used to be.
Not funny.
So here's the last part that's interesting too. So Forbes workers are joining a movement among journalists that have been organizing to raise media standards across the country. Something I know that you are an advocate of, raising journalistic standards. I don't think they belong to because this is local. Remember, it's a New York union.
I see.
So other media organizations that have been, I guess, organizing in some regard or another have been
That's interesting.
at the Insider, the Atlantic, and Southern California News Group.
Oh, interesting.
And they've been able to collectively use their voices to push for changes and big contract wins. And the News Guild of New York members, this local, had recently won a contract with Condé Nast that included just cause protections. I'm not sure I know what just cause means. I'll have to look that up. A ban on the use of NDAs, interesting, and significant wage increases. You may or may not know, reporters are notoriously low paid unless you're Andrew Ross Sorkin and publishing books that you're getting big money for.
Or a Substack writer like Glenn Greenwald.
Right, well, we've talked about Substack, right? So people could do that, or they can join a union. Now, I don't know what your views on union, but I am from a long lineage of, my father's a huge union advocate, although he never was in one because he never worked in a business that would have one. But are the tides turning? If white collar journalists can unionize like that, is that good for journalism? Is it good for media? And does it reflect on perhaps what could happen in other industries? I don't know. What do you think?
I'm always power for the people, right? So I think it's great. Whether people want to start a Substack or, unionize and try to turn the tide of whatever they see happening that they don't think should be happening. I'm all about action and not as into complaining from a place of being a victim. So anytime I see people doing this, I'm like, more power to you. Go get
right.
it.
What you're saying, so in whatever way that they see,
whatever way you see fit, whatever works for you, whatever you calls to your heart, like the thing that's the most important in my mind is to go do something.
So do you at all have the opinion that unions cause people to be lazy or take advantage of the system? Perhaps that's what non-union people usually.
That's interesting.
Usually rich white guys who own the company, they don't like it because it ties their hands financially. So like the teachers union, right? Or the police unions, guys in finance, banking, etc., say all of these unions have bled the public because a lot of them had healthcare for life. And that was part of the UAW. Healthcare for not only the person, the father, the mother who worked for Ford, but their entire family forever. Now, how long do you think that can last? The pension plans are decimating the tax base, but there has to be.
That's not good either. I mean,
and it's down to unions and union contracts. When you're talking about teachers and public employees, it's because they don't pay a lot, so they give them these benefits, but they're not sustainable over decades, right? But these are the things that unions provide, and these are the reasons why people don't like unions.
I see.
So I don't know to what extent a union like this one would get into that kind of stuff, but that's where they can sometimes, they could kill Forbes, right? If Forbes suddenly has to pay out, everybody's healthcare for the next 90 years, or pay 400 days of sick days out or something, right? Like everybody did that. I suspect they're not as liberal with this stuff anymore, or with this kind of a union.
Yeah, see, then that's where I go like, no, I don't like that.
And so this is coming from me. Believe me, that I'm not gonna be able to vote in the Democratic primary anymore. But that kind of stuff, when I was younger, I'd be like, down with business. Now that I'm older and I've kind of run my own business, or I've, helped companies run their own business, and you see the margins are so thin, and like from one, bad year to the next, it could be over.
I mean, again, it goes back to like
small business.
Yeah, it would crush the small business. I would never survive that.
So do you feel bad for Forbes? Probably not. Do you feel bad for Chrysler or whatever? Probably not. But this is the thing with teachers. What I think they should do, and they've sort of gotten closer to it. I have friends who are teachers or work, in public schools. Now, teachers to me are one of the most important jobs on planet Earth. Teachers, farmers, they should just get paid more and have more opportunity to be paid more, and maybe get less on the whole union shtick.
Right.
And it might be more motivating, and you might get higher quality people, and you might not have to deal with like the dead weight of people who are like, whatever, I got a job for life. What do I care? Most teachers, I mean, I think in New York City, they're lucky if they're making 50 grand a year. So going back, so I never was a reporter. I know they don't get paid a lot. And I have also recently read, as you have, a lot of stories how they don't get treated very well in terms of pay or job security or, being able to do what they do for a living, right? They can't write a story. They get told what to write or, write to Twitter or all of those kinds of things. So in order to maintain the sanctity of journalism and to protect their jobs, probably in some of the spirit of the way of why the teachers have a union, I can get with that. If it gives people outrageously generous benefits or else, then that's where people start to get complacent. Not everybody. There are obviously teachers and police officers and journalists who are like just uber motivated, and no matter what job they had in life, they would be the most motivated person in the room. But we do live in a capitalist society sort of still, and isn't, I don't know, half the game to make money and make more money?
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see. I'm happy that they did it, and I hope that it is carried out in the right way that keeps people motivated and improves the quality of jobs for journalists, because I definitely think that something has to happen in that regard.
Agreed. I think it's a wrap. I think we're ready for our closing.
They're going to revoke my card after that.
What card is this?
It's my election day. Is that backwards?
Oh, no, come on.
Free speech.
Oh my God. Thank you so much for tuning in for the PR Wind Down podcast.
And thank you to Jenn, with 2 N's, for joining us for today's interview.
Remember to submit your own agency stories and questions, and to share our show with your friends and colleagues. If you subscribe and leave us a rating, it'll help us reach new listeners like you.
And if you have an anonymous PR horror story of your own, send it our way at the contact email below the episode notes.
We can't wait to wind down with you again next time. Yay!